Hello, everybody. My name is Khalid Abdullah. I'm here with Defeats the Purpose. Have just had so much time to think about kind of my approach to the show and what I want to be able to do with it. And the things that I really like to focus on are inequality, imperialism, and just making sure that the people have their fair say in issues. And one of the things that we've been hearing a lot about lately is student loans, and it's a pretty tired discussion at this point. And I don't like to say that before doing jumping into an entire segment on it, but the problem with kind of this is that I really think that things need to be put in context for people. There's plenty of resources out there, as we're going to see here. There's a lot of resources um, for people to be engaged in kind of the student loan discussion, and there are just ways that I think that we can share this information to educate people on why it's such a massive problem and how to maybe even I'm going to try my best here, but how to maybe even refute some of the talking points, some of the counter talking points to why we should forgive student loans. Because personally, I think that we should forgive at least a significant portion, if not all, of student loan debt, because it's just spiraling out of control at this point. And we're going to kind of see why as I jump into the presentation here. So without further ado, I'm going to set up the presentation so that we can get into it. And thank you once again, everybody, for joining. So so here it is. This is my presentation on student loans, and we'll start to get going into it. So this article is just a sort of a preamble to everything that we're going to jump into. One thing that I want to point out is that this article is from 2019, so this is pre-pandemic talking points, and I'm just going to basically read the article, and then we're going to kind of jump into what it means and as we move along in the sections here. So first and foremost, borrowers in the US currently owe more than $1.4 trillion dollars in outstanding student loan debt, and not all of it is being paid back. In fact, only a little more than half of federally managed student loans are currently in repayment, according to data from the US Department of Education. That leaves the remaining outstanding debt in various states of limbo, such as forbearance, deferment, grace period, or default. And we're going to see that on a chart in the next slide. These repayment alternatives, except default, serve as exit ramps for borrowers who are unable to pay back their debt but intend to in the future. In the past year, as overall student loan debt in the U.S. has grown, so too has the proportion of debt that's being postponed by borrowers. As part of Experian's ongoing look at student loan debt, we analyzed consumer credit data and data from the DOE to see how borrowers are managing this debt. So, in this article, what they go through, and I'm gonna, you see the source here. I'm also going to show kind of all my sources at the very end of the presentation. In this article, you'll see that only half of outstanding student loans are in repayment. More student loan debt entering forbearance. Student loan deferment down slightly. Student loan defaults continue to climb. The grace period and in-school round out non-repayment loan numbers. So is what they talk about. So I actually don't need to mention that. But what I do want to mention, what I do want to focus on is the second paragraph here. They say the repayment alternatives, except default, serve as exit ramps for borrowers who are unable to pay back their debt but intend to in the future. I think that's a very troubling argument that makes a lot of assumptions that borrowers are somehow going to find the means at some point in their life to pay back the debt of education. And don't even get me started on why I think it's highly unethical to be charging students so much money for college education, graduate education, etc. in the first place, because I just think it creates a weaker and poorer working class when we need a strong working class. We need a strong, which would create a stronger society, a more educated society. And I think when you see that people are able to get into education, you're also going to see that it reduces inequality, not only from a general perspective, but among separate demographics, as we're going to see later as well. Because what you're going to see is not only do student loans impact people, but they impact different sectors, different demographics unfairly as well. And so this is on the next slide. You're going to see sort of the average student loan balance since 2009, you can see that now this is not adjusted for inflation, so keep that in mind. We're going to see the adjusted for inflation numbers later. But you can see that the average balance has gone up by 150%. It's by $15,000 over a 10-year period of time. And again, this is pre-pandemic. Um, so it's just pretty ridiculous. You can see that in 2009, it starts at $20,560. And by the time we get to 2019, we're all the way over at $35,620. I'm actually going to move my image. There we go. Just so you can see all the sources. Move myself up here a little bit. And I'm going to make myself a little bigger too. Look at that. So, yeah, $35,620 by 2019. I think that's just an astonishing amount of money to be in, on average, right? To be in student loan debt. Obviously, there's a lot of people who have a lot more money in student loan debt. Myself, for example, I was in $100,000 of student loan debt after I finished my master's degree, and it took me 7 years to pay that off. And it's actually a very long story, and I'll probably do a separate segment just on how I paid off my student loan debts, because it was pretty crazy, and it required a miracle in a manner. It was a blessing in disguise that happened to me that actually allowed me to pay off my student loan debts. So we're just going to move on here. So, of course, I do a little bit of adjustment for inflation here. So 20,560 in 2009 is worth 24,500 in 2019. It's still showing very little context of kind of the whole picture. But you can see here this is before the pandemic, that only 55.8% of people were actually in repayment of their student loans, where you have 12% that are defaulting, 10% are in forbearance, and 9.8% are in deferment. And then, of course, you have 2.9% in their grace period and 8.8% in school. And so so just looking at all of these numbers before we dive into why the bigger numbers are significant, I want to look at that grace period number. I think that's a very key thing here. One of the things that kids are sold on, one of the things that I was sold on when I was a kid, was that out of college, I was going to be handed the 6-month grace period so that before I could start paying off my student loans. And as a kid, you think, oh, wow, that's such a long period of time, 6 months. Of course, I'm going to have all the money together in 6 months. There's no way I'm not going to be able to start paying all this off. And what a lot of people fail to realize is, I feel like there are a lot of people that were much smarter than me at that point in time. They probably are still smarter than me, but particularly at that point in time, because I was a kid and I had no fundamental understanding of what this meant and how arduous the burden was going to be for me to pay off all of my student loans. 6 months is a very insignificant period of time. I mean, that was 15 years ago now, and I only just paid off all of my student loans 2 years ago. Meaning 15 years ago is when I graduated, and I only just paid off my student loans 2 years ago. Of course, you can see the 55.8% repayment number. Look, this should be 100%. I'm not gonna. In a healthy society where wages were going up at the rate of productivity, where people had the means to actually afford college, where people weren't frightened into not going, weren't scared into going to college for the fear that they wouldn't get a job that would satisfy them or make them feel successful in their own lives, because that's what we were told as kids. I graduated high school in 2003. I thought that I was going to go to college, and that the $40,000 of just for my undergraduate, just the $40,000 that I was going to rack up there was going to be enough. Was going to be a little enough amount of money for me to successfully pay all of that back. But once you get out of college and you get hit with these $200, $300 interest payments every single month, and you're making a paltry amount of money compared to kind of what you were expecting to be making when you got out of college, it makes it so that the first few years out of college, you're basically just paying interest. You're not really paying much principal. And then in that 6-month grace period, yeah, they're not charging you interest for that, but it's really like it's not that it's a short period of time or something like that. That's not my real problem with it. It's that it's sold to us as something that's more significant than it really is. I mean, look at this chart. You can see that the vast majority of people are not in their grace period. They're forced into a position where they either have to defer, go into forbearance, or default on these loans. And those are a lot of tough situations to be, particularly if you're in default. But I forget if it's a deferment or forbearance, but you're still racking up interest on your student loan debts in basically almost all of these situations, except if you have subsidized loans while you're in school, or of course in your grace period. So I just think that it's a shame that we basically left roughly 31% of people out to dry here, while 55.8% are in quote repayment. But as we're going to see later, repayment doesn't actually mean that they're paying off their student loans. It might just mean that they're paying off the interest, which is what I was doing for several years because I didn't have enough money to put anything toward the principal balance every single month. Because it's compounded monthly, it makes it pretty much impossible to put the amount of money that you would want to into your student loan payment while still being able to live a life and save money and do all that other stuff. So, of course, everyone's entitled to their own opinion. You know, there was a period in my life where I was eating rice and beans every single day just so I could pay off student loans. So that's totally true. But again, it just depends on your outlook and kind of how you look at it. Is it worth it for kids to go to college anymore because they can get basically all the skills that they need from the internet? Or do we still value the education system and are willing to make an investment in our students? Or, and I think this is really the larger point here, are we going to start checking colleges and making sure that they aren't able to raise prices as they have been for the last few decades? I mean, we're gonna look at that in a second. So this is the historical since 2003. This is the historic total of national student loan debt, and so you can see that it's just gone up dramatically. And I hope that I have it on here, but what you will see is that let's see if I have it. No, I don't have there. Okay. Well, I'll get into it in a second, but you're going to see why this is significant. And so you can see that it was only $330 billion in 2003, but now in 2020, it was $1.7 trillion of student loan debt. And well, you might think, oh, well, that's because X, Y, Z. One of those things, maybe X is the fact that you might think, oh, has college attendance gone up? Is that why student loan debt has gone up? Well, you're talking about a literal 500% increase of college attendance over the last, because 0.3 times 5 would be 0.15, or excuse me, 1.5. So that would be approximately where it is. So you're talking about 500% increase in college attendance in order to justify a five-fold increase in total outstanding national student loan debt. And so we're going to see that that's not actually the case. In fact, it's the opposite, and we'll get there. And this is just the Student Debt Crisis Center. So shout out to them on Twitter. They post just about every single day, as you can see, the updated student loan balance. And as of yesterday, not today, as of yesterday, the student debt balance was $1.873 trillion. And you can see from December 22nd on the bottom left, where it was 1.869 to today, 1.873. So that's only over a period of 18 days. The balance has gone up by $4 billion. So every 18 days, the balance goes up by $4 billion. That's every 180 days. That's $40 billion. That's every year. That's $80 billion that this is going up every single year on average, just based on these calculations. And as you can see, last year it went up by 0.13, $130 billion, and the year before it was $80 billion. So, and you're going to see kind of why it seems like it's slowing down a little bit. You're going to see why in a second. So now we're going to look at sort of more contemporary analysis and COVID's impact on student debt. You can see that 3.2 million new federal student loan borrowers. This is from the Education Data Initiative, by the way. Before I continue, I just want to give a big shout out to them. I got a lot of my data from them. They are an outstanding, outstanding website. Please go to their website and support them. They really know what they're talking about, and they are very much on the side of the borrowers in terms of pushing for reforms to this highly corrupted system. And I am totally with them on it. And so this is some of their analysis. 3.2 million new federal student loan borrowers and a spike in unemployment fueled the largest increase in the total student debt loan debt balance since 2013. Student debt relief efforts, however, may have helped drive down the average student loan debt. The nationwide student loan debt balance increased 8.28% in 2020. The average student loan debt, meanwhile, increased 4.5%. In May of 2020, 9% of borrowers who attended public institutions were behind on their student loan payments, 7% of borrowers who attended private nonprofit institutions, and 24% of borrowers who, it's a lot of couple of errors here already, unfortunately, and 24% of borrowers who attended private for-profit schools were behind on their loan payments. By July, 11.2% of adults with student loan debt reported that they were unable to make at least one student loan payment year to date that year. In early 2020, 75.3% of private student loans were in repayment, while 20% were in deferment. And finally, while many private lenders offered suspension in payments of up to 3 months, few, if any, deferred interest. And so that's why you kind of see that the government had to step in here. That's one of the reasons the government probably had to step in here, was because it was just going to get ridiculous. You were probably going to see a mass scale of people's wages getting garnished. I mean, because these people, they'll go after you in any possible way to get their money. That's just how they are. These institutions, they will go after you in any possible way to get their money. They don't care. And I've heard about it in my own life. I don't have any examples of that here today prepared, but there are anecdotally, there are things that I've heard of in terms of ways people have gone after others, including garnishing your wages and kind of making your life, going after you in court and kind of making your life a living hell when you already don't have enough money to do anything about it. So moving on to the next slide, student loan debt by educational attainment. Graduate students borrow 37% of student loan dollars. 60% of undergraduate certificate recipients owe an average of $16,000. So you can see that undergraduates. That's just undergraduate certificate recipients. Sorry, that's different from bachelor's degree. So just a big distinction there. 63% of bachelor's degree holders owe an average of $31,790 in federal loans. So I personally had about $40,000 in loans in both federal and private loans from the University of Connecticut. Unfortunately, I did have to take out private loans. I don't remember why, all the circumstances at this point. That was a very long time ago. And then 54% of master's degree holders owe an average of $70,000. So you see, and now a master's degree is only 2 years, but they're charging you insane amounts of money for those 2 years. In 2 years, in a lot of instances. For me, it was 2 years. And for me, it cost $50,000 to do my master's degree. And you can say, hey, I made a lot of mistakes. Of course I did. In hindsight, it's very easy to say that I made a lot of mistakes. I would have probably learned how to code a lot earlier in my life, and I would have made a lot of different decisions if I was able to act on the hindsight that I have today. But unfortunately, nobody gets to do that. You have to kind of deal with the circumstances as they are. And I already paid off my student loans. It was very hard, and I had to bankrupt myself a couple of times to do it, but I finally did it, and now I'm thankfully I'm better off because of it, and I'm able to sort of build up my life as a result of it. And I don't wish that on anybody. I believe that I'm not saying that school should necessarily be free or not or whatever, but what they're doing with schools right now, the way that they're just raising prices year over year. I mean, it's year over year. Every single year they're raising prices. So I'll just move on here to the second sort of paragraph or a set of bullet points. Student debt experience. Even when there is equality in loan distribution, experiences with student loan debt vary with contributing factors. 52% of students who had taken on student loan debt did not feel it was worth it. That's me. Because I got a master's degree in accounting. I am a computer programmer now. Okay. I only did accounting for 2 years after my undergraduate, and then I got laid off because of the economic recession. And then I wasn't able to pay off my student loans because I couldn't find work for 3 years. So, student loan payments have an annual growth rate of 6.6%. We're going to dive into sort of that metric a little later. 53% of millennials have not bought a home because student loan debt either disqualified them or made it impossible to afford a mortgage. Yeah, that's totally true. I wasn't able to buy a home basically until now. I'm 36. I wasn't able to buy a home until this year, or excuse me, at the beginning of last year, because I had to pay off those student loans first. I mean, my wife still has $100,000 in student loans. It is, and she's in right now. Thankfully, she's not having to pay anything on it, but she was paying 400. She's paying $450 a month normally. So I know that they've paused the payments for now, but when and if they restart those payments, she's going to have to pay $450 a month, and that's an income based repayment plan, and that means what that means is that she's not even paying all of the interest every single. Oh, whoops, she's not even paying all of the interest every single month. She's paying less than all of the interest every single month, which means that her principal balance goes up every single month. And the reason she's doing that is because she's a public school educator. She's a special education teacher. And so she is in a 10-year forgiveness program, but not everybody has that capacity to go to a 10-year forgiveness program. And the school system is a complete, pardon my language, it's a complete shit show right now. It's not, teachers are getting burned out left and right. The requirements that they're putting on teachers is crazy. She's getting assigned new and different I don't want to have to speak for her, but because she's just one example of a lot of different examples where this is happening. But it's really troubling to see kind of what's happening to teachers right now and healthcare workers, of course. I mean, my heart really goes out to them at this point, just because of what they've had to battle through over the last 2 years thanks to COVID. So moving on. In 2018, 30% of college students lived at or below the poverty line. I mean, that was me when I was just out of college. When I was collecting unemployment for 2 years, I was below the poverty line. But I still had to pay rent because I wasn't living at home. I was living on my own. And I was trying to figure out, I was sending in resumes every single week, trying to figure out how I could get something. I ended up becoming a volunteer firefighter. Again, I'm going to do a whole story on that. So 14% are single parents, and 56% of them devote over 30 hours a week caring for children. And 88% of single parents in college have incomes at or below 200%. Oh my God, of the poverty line. That's just wild. That's crazy. I mean, they're not earning. Of course, a lot of people aren't able to successfully study and earn money at the same time while they're in college, because a lot of people, their brains just don't work in the same way that a lot of people's do. Like if you're a genius and you can juggle studying and having a job at the same time, great. But a lot of people have to freaking study all week long just to make good grades in college. It's not that easy for them. And now we're punishing those people for working actually harder than others, in a manner of speaking, to just so that they can get the grades necessary to prove themselves to event with the eventuality of it, of course, being employers when they get out of college. So now we're going to just take a look at, this is data these are actually charts that I've come up with. Not that difficult to come up with the charts. If you go to the National Center for Education Statistics, another great website, you can get this data yourself. And this is just a chart that I put together. These are all dollar values, of course, in US dollar values. This is the cost of college year over year. And you can see that, and this is in constant 2018 dollars, which I think is very important. And of course, you can see the no inflation dollars. It's very linear. So when you're looking at actual cost of college, in 2000, the annual cost of college was $18,692 on average, right? Regardless of if you just aggregate public, private institutions, four-year universities in particular, which is what I'm looking at here, is a four-year universities. It was on average $18,692, and today it's going to cost you an extra $10,000 adjusted for inflation, which means the real cost of college over the last 18 years has gone up by $10,000. And we're gonna see how sort of wages for the people who really need to go to college haven't gone up. And so on the next slide, you can see the public cost of college went up by $8,000 over that same period of time. That's adjusted for inflation. And then you're going to see that for private institutions, that went up from 31,000 to 44,000. That's a $13,000 year over year increase. It doesn't sound like much in a manner of speaking. $13,000 in 1 year doesn't sound like much in a manner of speaking, but then you aggregate that over 4 years. Well, now you're looking at $52,000 that someone has to repay in addition, right? Because it's over a 4 year period. So you got 13,000 times four. So that's a pretty massive obstacle to have to cover for an individual, in my opinion. If you're someone that feels like a private college is going to get you the best success out in the real world, well, unfortunately, the reality of those expectations doesn't actually match up with what you had hoped for. And it's I think that's the real problem. That's one of the real glaring issues here, is that we have a crisis that is sort of unchecked, self-perpetuating, uses interest to keep people impoverished and unable to pay off their student loans in a timely manner. And it also forces people into a psychological impairment, because when you don't have access to funds in your own life, it actually shows that your IQ goes down. So there are studies to show that people who just simply have access to money are able to make better decisions. And that's true. I mean, once you have access to money, it just opens up your options for so many different things and ways of thinking, because when you don't have money, you don't even have the option to think that way. So this is kind of touches on what I was talking about previously about wage earners. So you can see that like real wages from really the 10th percentile, and an argument can be made for the 75th percentile, that real wages haven't really gone up over the last 20 years. I mean, this is a really astonishing figure. Look at the 10th percentile. There, it hasn't gone up at all. I wish I had a chart for maybe I'll just pull it up on the internet or something, but I wish I had a chart for the sort of real wages versus the productivity in the United States, because you can see that the productivity in the United States goes up like this, and real wages stays flat over the same period of time. But if you were in the 90th percentile of earners in the country, then good for you. You got a real good bump in your salary. And I'm not saying that they shouldn't, but I am necessarily saying that the bottom, the middle, they should all get a similar bump in their salaries as well, because the productivity has gone up. So your standard of living should be better now. Your standard of living as a result of the productivity of society should now be better, but we are not seeing that happening for people, and that is going to push a lot of people out of the college market, which is just, that's speculation on my part, but I haven't actually done the research for all of that yet. But I do believe that if we were able to give, and you're going to see in a little bit, I do have a chart on why this is relevant, but if we are able to afford people the ability to go to college at a reasonable price, you will actually see that the impact of their low wages won't be so severe later on in life. So you can see that college costs have increased by 169% since 1980, but pay for young workers is only up by just 19%, according to a Georgetown report. So this was published in 2021. And you can see here that the percent change in college costs and earnings for young workers, I mean, it's just a depressing figure. And it really begs the question for me, like, why hasn't anyone brought this up as the problem? We look at student loan debt as one of the issues, but to me, the real problem comes to the fact that colleges are able to get away with raising their prices so much. And I think, I'm not saying they're doing it to be nefarious, but I do think that it's something that needs to be looked into. Like, why wouldn't you check that or put some sort of regulation on that to say, hey, you can only raise college costs to keep up with. I mean, maybe demand has some, I mean, you're going to see that demand doesn't have anything to do with it in a manner of speaking. But why wouldn't you want to introduce some sort of regulation to prevent colleges from raising their prices? Why are we putting kids through this? I just want to ask that question and kind of let it linger, because the suffering that people have to go through in their own lives because of this is, it's profound, and there's really no way to describe it, um, unless you've gone through it yourself and you just see that chunk of change getting taken out of your paycheck every single month. That could be going to groceries, that could be going to your savings, that could be going to investments, that could be going to all kinds of other different things in your life. And it's just really depressing. So, I mean, just take a look at this chart. You know, I mean, sure, it's gone up a little bit toward the end here, but look at that. The average college cost has just skyrocketed away from it. And it's linear. That's the really crazy. I mean, it's like, if you if you drew a regression line, you'd see that this is a perfectly linear line. So colleges are just doing every single month, every single year. They're just like, you guys have to pay more by this much. Well, it's adding up. It's time to do something about it. So this is what I was talking about before. That you may think, oh well, people may think, they may draw the argument that there's a lot more people going to college. That's not the case at all. There's not a lot more people going. In fact, there are less people going to college, and these are pre-pandemic numbers. The actual numbers after the pandemic, they've dropped off even more significantly, and we're going to see that in a second. But in 2010, total college enrollment was 21 million people. It was at its peak, right? And since then, it's been going down ever so slightly, but it's still going down. Still going down overall. You're seeing now we're at 19.6 million. So why is the outstanding student debt still going up? As more kids are going into school, getting jobs, graduating, getting jobs, and paying off their debts, you would expect that outstanding student loan debt balance to stay consistent. But for some reason, it's going up every single year. And that's the problem. That's why this is a crisis, is because it's out of control. Despite the fact that less people are going to college today, those people, the people's ability to actually pay off their student loan debt is basically impossible. It's $1.8 trillion. That is a astounding astronomical figure to expect young people in this country who start out with basically no wealth, and nothing after college. Like, let's just do a thought experiment and just imagine that the majority of people after they graduate don't really have much. Now we're forcing them to pay back student loans at a ridiculous rate when they can't even find a job that's going to pay them enough to cover their cost of living and their lifestyle, wherever they may live, plus this amount of money that they're going to have to pay back to student loans on top of it, plus interest. That's the worst part, is the interest. If they didn't charge so much interest for kids to go to school and get educated, it wouldn't be as severe a problem, because then you could reasonably expect a person to pay off the principal balances, and maybe even a small amount. I'm not a huge fan of interest personally. I know that there's a lot of arguments for why it's a good thing or whatever, but I'm not a huge fan of it when it comes to college debt. That's just unfair. You're stacking the cards against somebody before they've even had a chance. And that's frightening. A lot of these things are frightening. A lot of these details and statistics are frightening. This is also back to the Education Data Initiative. They're, again, check them out. Really great. I'm going to post all their links, all of the links that I used here to aggregate this data. Excuse me, at the very end of this presentation. So this is from NPR. This is from October of 2021. So pretty recent. Enrollment at U.S. colleges and universities is on track to fall by another nearly 500,000 undergraduate students this fall, continuing the historic drops that began with the start of the coronavirus pandemic, according to new data out Tuesday. The decline of 3.2% in undergraduate enrollment this fall follows a similar drop of 3.4% the previous year, the first fall of the pandemic, according to the research from the National Student Clearinghouse Research Center. The numbers are from a preliminary data set representing 8.4 million undergrad and graduate students from about 50% of U.S. colleges. The numbers show that there are now 240,000 fewer undergraduates enrolled this fall compared with the same time last year. And if that rate of decline holds up for the rest of the colleges, that could translate into almost 500,000 fewer undergraduate students. It's very frightening. Hey, there's that word again, says Doug Shapiro, who runs the nonprofit research center. Far from filling the hole of last year's enrollment declines, we are still digging it deeper. If these preliminary numbers hold up, Shapiro says the last 2 years of undergrad decline, totaling more than 6%, would be the largest 2-year decrease in at least half a century. That's astonishing. So the pandemic has only exacerbated the issue of students attending college, because as we saw back here, the historical college enrollment. Well, why did we have such a significant increase of people wanting to go to college, and then suddenly it starts to decline? The population of the United States has only gone up significantly in that period of time. You would expect people's attendance of college or universities to go up as well. But that hasn't happened. So one argument that can, I'm not saying this is the argument, but one argument that can be made is that people are starting to get pushed out of the college market because they're seeing that the return on their investment and the pain and the struggle that they might go through to try and even afford college might be too severe. So we'll move on to this CNBC article. This is from 2020. Coronavirus slows pace of college tuition increases. So I love the framing here. They say it slows the pace of college tuition increases. That's a very strange way of saying, hey, colleges are still increasing their tuition rates despite the fact that people are now not going to college at the same rates as they were before. So over the last decade, the cost of attending a 4-year public college or university has grown significantly year after year until now. Amid the coronavirus and economic crisis, increases in tuition and fees are lower than ever, according. So it's this really bizarre framing. Why would you frame it that way? This is how I would frame it. Hey, colleges are still increasing the prices of their tuition and fees, despite the fact that people are dropping out. There's reduced demand and there's an increase in supply, right? Because now there's more positions to be filled at those universities. Excuse me. And they're still increasing prices. Despite all of that. And they say, the fees in the third paragraph here for the 2021 academic year average tuition and fees increased by just 1.1%. As if that's like, I mean, why would you frame it this way? So I just have a problem with the way this article is written. I'm only citing it because of it just states a fact here that they're still raising their prices here. And then I also want to point out the sort of, I don't want to call it disingenuous framing, but I don't agree with the framing here. I think that if you're a reasonable person, and the way that you would want to write this article is by saying, hey, colleges, cut it out. Stop doing this stuff. We need to start putting more pressure on these places to stop raising prices for our kids to attend their universities, just so that they can pay exorbitant speaking fees to whoever is going to be there at their graduation ceremonies. I mean, it's ridiculous. We already know that colleges spend a lot of money on speaking fees for people. So it's kind of a ridiculous precedent to just be continually raising prices for people every single year, even though they're raking in record amounts of money from kids from these places. So I don't want to speculate on why they're doing this or what this is. And, for me, it's impossible to say that all of these people are all of these different universities are coordinating across the board as some sort of grand conspiracy. No, I don't think that's it. I just think that they're allowed to get away with it, and so they're going to get away with it. They're going to get away with it as long as they possibly can. So let's go ahead and reread that third paragraph. So for the 2021 academic year, average tuition and fees increased by just 1.1% for in-state students at four-year public colleges, reaching $10,560, and 2.1% for students at four-year private institutions. Now, just keep in mind that they say in-state students, so those numbers for in-state students is vastly different for the amounts that people pay at out of state, right? Because it's usually about a $10,000 increase if you're out of state for public colleges. Excuse me. And 2.1% for students at four-year private institutions to $37,650, the lowest percentage increases in 3 decades, according to the College Board. You could also say, instead of the lowest percentage increases, hey, you're still raising prices. Like, that should be the focus here. Why are you still raising prices? In 10 states, average tuition and fees at four-year in-state public schools did not increase at all. Cool. At least that's something, right? Hey, it didn't increase this year. Awesome. Let's do a victory lap. This is from U.S. News. Not sure what date this is from. Oh, well, it's very recent because it's from 2021 to 2022 data. So see the average college tuition in 2021 to 2022. The average sticker price for in-state schools is about 73% less than what's charged by private colleges, U.S. News found. The average college tuition cost has increased in the 2021-2022 academic year over the prior year across both public and private schools, U.S. News data shows. A college's sticker price is the amount advertised as the full rate for tuition and fees before financial need, scholarships, and other aid are factored in. Net price is the amount that a family pays after aid and scholarships, usually offsetting the sticker price shock. Despite some schools implementing tuition freezes and discounts last school year due to the economic impact of the coronavirus pandemic on families across the country, tuition rates are up. The average tuition and fees at private ranked colleges has climbed about 1%, according to data for the 2021-2022 school year submitted to U.S. News in an annual survey. Similarly, the average price for both in-state and out-of-state tuition and fees at ranked public schools has increased by around 1% to 2%. So that's pretty consistent with the last article. It's depressing. So this is more data from the Education Data Initiative. The annual cost of college, 4-year in-state, $25,000, 4-year out-of-state, $43,000, 2-year in-state, $16,000, 4-year at a private institutions now, 4-year nonprofit is $53,000. What? How does this make any sense? How does it? I don't understand. I just on its surface, and maybe someone can explain this to me. But why is a nonprofit organization? Why does that cost nearly $20,000 more? Excuse me, I really need some water. Why does that cost $20,000 more than a for-profit school? It doesn't make any sense to me. It doesn't make any sense to me at all. The report highlights the average cost of college in the United States is $35,720 per student per year. The cost has tripled in 20 years. And this is more recent data, so keep that in mind. The cost has tripled in 20 years with an annual growth rate of 6.8%. Now, when they say tripled, I think they might mean not adjusted for inflation, because as we saw previously, it was 169% according to the other data that we saw. The average in-state student attending a public four-year institution spends $25,615 for one academic year. The average cost of in-state tuition alone is $9,580. Out-of-state tuition averages $27,437. The average traditional private university student spends a total of $53,949 per academic year, $37,200 of it on tuition and fees. Considering student loan interest and loss of income, the ultimate cost of a bachelor's degree may exceed $400,000. It's crazy. And so I put this chart together. So I was comparing data from two different sources, and I kind of put it together on a chart. As you can see, the average student loan balance has gone from $20,560 all the way up to $35,620 today, with marginal average cost increases over the same period. So from 2009 to 2019. Man, I'm gonna have to pause it here. I just need a glass of water. I'm gonna pick right back up where I started. Just pardon me for a second. Thanks.
A few moments later.
Okay, I'm back. Sorry about that. I'm still doing it. My wife got me some water and some coffee, so that should help a little bit. I'm gonna try and bang out the rest of this. So let's move on here. So as you can see, that despite there being sort of marginal increases to the total average cost of universities right now, we're still in a position where those marginal increases may mean significant increases for individuals, in terms of the total amount of money that they end up needing to pay back, because there's a $4,000 increase in an already very expensive college experience from 2009 to 2019. Well, that $4,000 is over every single year. So you would reasonably expect that there to be an increase of $16,000 over a 4-year period of time from anybody graduating college. And as you can see, from 2009, the average student loan balance is from 20,000 to 35,000, and so that's a $15,000 increase in their average student debt balance over that same period. So you are seeing that very small increases in college expenses year over year lead to much bigger increases in the average amount of debt that a person carries as a result, because when you get out, now you're paying an extra $4,000. That seems like, not a lot of money, but over a 4-year period of time, that's still 16,000 extra dollars that a person is expected to pay back over that period of time. So this is from Education Week. Fewer students in class of 2020 went straight to college. Amid a sharp decline in college enrollment during the pandemic, graduates of low-income, high-poverty high schools were disproportionately affected, with their enrollment dropping most steeply, new data reveals. So this goes back to what I was talking about previously, that there are different demographics that are going to be affected differently by what's going on, right? Well, I'll go ahead and I'll read, and then we'll start to comment on it. If you're a low-income kid, a kid of color, a first-generation college-going kid, the actual process necessary for you to get from high school to college is incredibly fragile, even in the best of circumstances, said Darrell Bradford. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. The executive vice president of 50CAN, a national nonprofit that advocates for equitable schools. The tiniest hiccup can mean that your entire college experience is derailed. The focus it takes to make sure that an underprivileged kid gets to college, matriculates, and manages to stay there for all 4 years is immense. That's true. The 8th annual high school benchmarks report from the National Student Clearinghouse found that as of November 16th, college enrollments dropped by 6.8%, more than quadrupling the pre-pandemic rate of decline, a pattern magnified based on poverty level. Overall, 56.5% of the 2020 graduating class enrolled in post-secondary school immediately after graduating, compared with 60.5% for the 2019 graduating class. That's a precipitous decline year over year. And so now we're going to see fewer students headed straight to college last fall in the midst of the pandemic. So this is that chart graphed out, that data graphed out on a chart. Notably, schools with high populations of poor students of color experienced a much greater decline in enrollment. This is the important thing, compared with those from whiter and wealthier schools, a reversal of pre-pandemic trends. So here we go. The pandemic has created another kind of systemic inequality, in that poorer and students of color experienced a much greater decline in enrollment compared with those from whiter and wealthier schools. A reversal of pre-pandemic trends. High poverty high schools sent 46% of 2020 graduates to college this past fall, compared with 70% of graduates from low poverty schools. In 2019, high poverty high schools sent 51.5% of graduates to college, compared with 72.6% of low poverty schools. The results support Education Week's findings that the coronavirus has most disrupted post high school plans for students from low income families. So, this is just another fallout of what was already a severe problem for people in low income families to try and go to college in the first place, and now has exacerbated that issue even further as a result of the pandemic and government's inaction on the issue, because government isn't doing anything about college costs. They keep focusing on student debt. They're not talking about the real issue, which is the actual cost of college in the first place. Students wouldn't need to take out so much debt if college was more affordable, if their sticker price or their whatever you want to call it was more affordable in the first place. Because people are still required to get a master's degree, for example, just to get into certain kinds of professions. And as we saw before, I'm going to try and pull up the chart. Sorry, it's over here. Yeah. Oh, no. Where did I have the data? I'm sorry. Bear with me for a second. Here it is. Sorry. So, as you can see, professional degree holders owe an average of $199,540. I mean, that's ridiculous. You're punishing people for pursuing excellence. You're putting them in a position to hate their choice to go to college, to become intelligent people. Whether or not you view them as intelligent people or not, that's what they think they're doing. And now you're going to punish them for that. You're going to make them suffer for a significant portion of their youth, of their lives, in most of these instances, just for wanting to go out and make a difference, so that they can make a difference in their own way by attaining the educational requirements to do so. I work with someone right now who has a PhD in chemistry, and he said it's not worth it, because by the time you make the money to pay off the debt, you end up having all the experience you need anyway. So it's a net zero. So the marginal increases in income that you may gain are going to go off to pay off that debt anyway, and by the time you pay off the debt, you're going to have all the experience that you needed anyway. So what I'm trying to say is that I'm not saying that the degree is then useless. You can always be proud of the degree that you had, but you're still looking at many years of repayment before you actually see any fruit from your investment. And I just think that's just a disgusting practice. So, let's come back here. So yeah, low income families, of course, they're impacted most severely by these, even though it doesn't look like much. 5% doesn't look like much on its surface, but you're talking about thousands and thousands and thousands of people across the country. You're talking about potentially tens of thousands of people across the country. And so those differences become severe over the longer period, because we don't know if that number is going to go back up. And because we're still in the pandemic, I would love to see what the 2021 numbers are going to be. How is that impacting low income families versus high income families? Honestly, neither of these groups rather should be suffering. But that is unfortunate that, of course, the most vulnerable people in our population are the ones to always suffer the worst when bad things happen. That is not an indicator of a good society. So this is from that same article from Education Week, that experts fear inequities will grow. These declines that we're seeing now are going to deepen the inequities that already exist within our education system, said Mamie Voigt, interim president at the Institute for Higher Education Policy. Americans who can benefit the most from the mobility that a higher education provides are the least likely to be able to attend right now. The research from the National Student Clearinghouse is drawn from about 3,500 public high schools that pay for its student tracker for high schools service, a group that represents 14% of U.S. high schools. Low-income high schools are slightly overrepresented in the data. Experts say two factors have likely contributed to the uneven decline in college enrollment last year for high school graduates. The first is virtual instruction making learning less accessible and engaging, especially for low income students who may not have broadband access and other learning resources. The second is the economic and health fallout of COVID-19, which has hit students who are Black and Latino and their families the hardest, sometimes requiring students to work and provide caregiving for their families and making it increasingly difficult to afford a college education. I don't know what more I can add there. So now we're on to back to Education Data Initiative. This is another chart that I wanted to push in here. These are sort of the historical average federal student loan debt adjusted for inflation. So some of my one of my charts didn't have it adjusted for inflation. This is adjusted for inflation here. So the average federal student loan debt that you can see was 22,708 in 2007. The chart that I had started at 2009, so we can start there. It was 24,792 in 2009, and now today you're talking about, in today dollars, you're talking about an extra $12,000 of debt that a person has to pay off. That's not an insignificant amount of money. That's not an insignificant amount of money. That's an investment someone that could be making, that could grow over a period of time, instead of having to dump it into a company whose sole purpose is to lend fictitious dollars with the promise of future repayment. The report highlights are that the average student loan debt grows at a rate of 7.8% per year. So previously it was 6.6%. This is reporting 7.8. One of the things I have with all the data that I'm getting and all the different sources that I'm aggregating from is that the data is sometimes inconsistent. That is a problem. I don't think that's the fault. It's just the way that they're aggregating the data, the point in time that they're aggregating the data, because like some of the data is aggregated at the end of the second quarter of the fiscal quarter of the year. Some of the data is aggregated at the end of the year. So it just depends on how they're doing it. And so if you see discrepancies in the data that I'm reporting across the entire length of the presentation, just keep in mind that I'm doing the best that I can to just grab all the data and try and paint an aggregate picture for you. But that doesn't necessarily mean that all of it is 100% accurate. Like I would never say that all of this data is 100% accurate. These are just benchmarks for people to understand the severity of the situation facing this country, that I'm taking from different locations and just kind of presenting it as holistically as I possibly can. So just keep that in mind. The average monthly student loan payment for the class of 2021 is an estimated $433. It's around what my wife was paying pre-pandemic. And that was not even all of the interest, remember that. The average student loan debt per borrower at graduation is an estimated $36,900. That's around what I had when I graduated 15 years ago. Student loan debt at graduation has increased 76% since the class of 2000, a growth rate that outpaces the rate of inflation by 41%. And I think that's the most important factor here, is that the growth rate of student debt is outpacing the rate of inflation, which is just one factor, right? Wages is an entirely different factor. And after you adjust for inflation, the average student loan debt at graduation has increased 326% since 1970. 326% after adjusting for inflation. Since 2003, the national total student loan debt balance has grown 602.5%. There's no justification for that number. Student loan debt by graduation year. I just thought that this was an interesting thing that to look into. One rough guide for determining debt rates by graduation year is the average student debt by age. A significant portion of students, however, do not graduate at the traditional age of 22. Another rough estimate uses the average debt at graduation as well as the average starting salary for graduation for graduates. The average debt per student borrower was $37,693. Many guides reference the average debt per enrolled student, which is $30,000. Note these are often the only parameters available for historical pre-21st century data. The average salary for bachelor's degree holders will be higher than the average starting salary for new graduates. I'm not sure what that means. Ideally, indebted borrowers would make payments based on 10% of their annual income. In practice, many borrowers make monthly payments based on a lower percentage. This is potentially influenced by other economic factors, such as the rising cost of living. That's absolutely true. Ideally, all students who graduated before 2015 will have repaid all their educational loan debt. Reality does not reflect this ideal. And this is kind of where they start to make their point, as it takes the average student borrower up to 20 years to pay off their loans. 20 years. So if you graduate when you're 22, let's just say hypothetically you graduate when you're 22, you're talking about the age of 42 when you're finally done paying off your student loans. I mean, look at me. I was 34. I was only 8 years out from being 42 by the time I paid off my student loans. And the only reason I was able to pay them off was because of a series of crazy events that happened that allowed me to do it. Now, you're probably thinking, oh, well, what did money fall into your lap? In a manner of speaking, yeah. I was fortunate. I still paid all of it. I paid all of it. It was all my own money. I'll keep that in mind. It was all my own money that I paid it off with. But it was a series of events that happened that allowed me to do it. Nobody gave me any money. It was just again, I'll explain it in a separate video. God damn it. Sorry, give me 1 second. Reports of the average student debt are often based on total enrollment as opposed to the average debt per borrower. Current debt estimates are based on interest rates and payment plans, yada, yada, yada. And this is sort of one of the final points that I'll be making. I think there's only a handful more slides. I think there's four more slides here. Analysis: student loans may fuel the cycle of poverty. The average 1996 college graduate left school with $12,750, $21,509 after adjusting for inflation in student loan debt. Just over 10 years later, 1996 graduates with debt remaining owed an average of $16,500. That's crazy. With a median debt of $17,000. Wow. So the average 1996 college graduate left school with $12,750 in student loan debt. Just over 10 years later, those same graduates with debt remaining owed an average of $16,500 with a median debt of $17,200. So 10 years later, it went up. The amount of money they owed went up. Theoretically, the average debt per borrower in a single graduating class should diminish with each passing year. In 10 years, however, 1996 graduates who were still in debt had an average balance 1.28% lower than it had been the previous decade. Further, a median balance of $17,200 indicates that the largest outstanding balances among 1996 graduates must not total much more than $34,400 or 6.78% less than the average 2021 graduates' estimated student loan debt. Finally, the consistency of the average outstanding balance indicates that over the long term, 1996 graduates are often able to make payments that go toward interest but not toward the loan's principal. In other words, their debt rarely shrinks despite years in repayment. You should go to you should check out there's a student debt Twitter account that asks people to send them their loan balances and when they started paying and the loan balance that they have today. A lot of the people, they started paying off their loans 10 years ago and their loan balances are actually higher today. And they've been making consistent payments the entire time. All of this indicates a long-term struggle among borrowers to make payments toward their loan's principal. In the long run, this means they pay more for their loans. Thus, student loan borrowers who lack finances to pay off their loans remain in debt. So My friend wanted me to look at sort of U.S. birth rates, and so there is some merit to this that U.S. birth rates have gone down somewhat since 2000, and so that maybe that contributes a little bit to why college attendance is down. I don't think there's a lot of merit to that argument. I mean, it probably is a factor in a manner of speaking, but I on its surface, it doesn't seem like a savory argument to me because people, if they can afford college, I think still would want to go to college. And so, but there's more analysis. The point is, I'm speculating. There's more analysis to be done there. I do want to kind of look into that a little more. It's a very difficult kind of topic to address. So finally, this is from CBS News. Student loan repayments are restarting in May, and this is sort of a I think the biggest FU that you could give to the public is in the middle of this pandemic, when the government has already done so little to help the people, have forced mandates, lockdowns, and other measures on the public over the last 2 years, which in a manner of speaking is just. I'm not saying they're trying to psychologically impair the public, but has resulted in a lot of psychological impairment for the public. This is just another way of messing with people when they don't need to. People are suffering right now. They don't need to be put into student loan repayment at this point in time. The economy isn't back on track. Our system is crumbling. Healthcare workers are burnt out all over the country. Teachers are burnt out all over the country. Numerous different numerous different types of workers are burnt out. For example, our essential workers, who they still haven't raised the wages for, who now they're calling them low skilled workers when it comes time to actually talk about their wages. Now you want to call them low skilled workers instead of essential workers. So I just think there's all kind of like weird chicanery that's going on with the system right now that this is just such a kick in the face. And it's depressing. And that's really the point of this whole segment, is that it's depressing. This is just really a miserable time for people, and they're not getting any relief from their government in any capacity. I mean, you look at what other governments have done during this pandemic, and particularly in industrialized countries, and many of those countries like Japan and Australia, they paid for the wages of their workers. Um, During the pandemic, I'm not saying that was necessarily the right or the wrong thing to do, but you can't impose lockdown measures on people without giving them a way to live. You have to give them a way to make ends meet. Because as you know, there was another eviction crisis that resulted because of this pandemic, and the government didn't do anything about that either. So they're allowing, through neglect, the government is allowing more poverty and homelessness to happen. And it's really terrifying to think that they can just do that. They can just do that to people. As the coronavirus pandemic forced millions into unemployment and financial uncertainty in March 2020, federal student loan payments were put on pause and interest rates were set at zero. In August, the Biden administration issued an extension of the federal student loan payment pause to January 31st, 2022, and despite warning that it was a, quote, final extension, the administration has now postponed repayments again to May 2022. It's evil. It's just evil. If you're a government employee and you see this and you have the authority to do something like this, I would just love an explanation of why you think that this is a good idea when people are already suffering in the middle of all of this. Quote, as we are taking this action, I'm asking all student loan borrowers to do their part as well. Take full advantage of the Department of Education's resources to help you prepare for payments to what? What resources? What are they talking about? You're not allowed to discharge student loan debt in bankruptcy. You can't do it. So it follows you around for the rest of your life. That's the end of it. You have to literally die for them to forgive you. That's the only way you or there are a few other technicalities in terms of how they can forgive you, but for the majority of people, they don't apply. Look at options to lower your payments through income-based repayment. Again, that doesn't do anything to help you pay off your student loan debt. That just it just increases the timeline of repayment so that you're forced into a payment plan that makes you pay this off over a longer period of time, so that we are paying more interest on top to these companies, again, that are lending you fictitious dollars just so you can get an education to do the job that you wanted to do. It's crazy. Take full advantage of the Department of Education's resources. That's just such a racket. Income-based repayment plans. That is so infuriating to me that they would even recommend something like that. There needs to be more public pressure around this. We all need to stand up and fight for people around this, because this would, forgiving student debt, at least some of it, at least a significant portion of it for most people. I'm not talking about $10,000. I'm talking about forgiving half of all student loan debt for every single person. Would be such a benefit to everyone in our society, both psychologically. Like, that's just the bare minimum. I'm not even saying that should be it. I'm personally, if it was up to me, 100%. You forgive 100% of student loan debt. You make colleges affordable, and you put regulations in place that prevent colleges from raising their prices year over year the way that they have been. But you can't just come out here with an article saying, oh, take advantage of the Department of Education's resources. There are no resources. It's completely fake. Income-based repayment plans. It's ridiculous. We already know that there are people on income-based repayment plans who are only paying interest, and they're not even covering all of the interest balance on that income-based repayment plan. So that, in effect, you're extending their timeline out infinitely, because if they never make the amount of money, if they never end up making the amount of money for that income-based repayment plan to cover at least some of the principal portion of the balance, that person is going to be paying for their student loans for the rest of their lives. That's not a life worth leaving. Sorry. That's not a life worth leading, in my opinion. Explore public service loan forgiveness. So you need to spend 10 years of your life at an institution that's covered by the Department of Education, that's covered by this public loan forgiveness program. 10 years you have to spend. And many of those institutions are horribly run institutions. And then on top of that, for a very long period of time, they weren't even actually forgiving the debts for the majority of people. I think it was something like only 2% of people who had gone through this 10-year forgiveness process actually had their debts actually forgiven. They're still fighting to have their debts forgiven today. And make sure you are vaccinated and boosted when eligible. What? It's just a complete non sequitur. It's just a complete non sequitur. That has nothing to do with student loan forgiveness. Nothing. Said President Joe Biden in a statement announcing the latest extension. So this is just more evil shit that President Joe Biden is doing. It's just evil. And he speaks in that language of comfort. That's going to be one of the themes of this show, by the way, is how people speak in this language of comfort to make you feel better about something when it's actually a really horrible policy designed to make people impoverished, poor, incarcerated, or just prevent them from ever being financially successful in their lives. Because having financial mobility would be, and this is just my theory, is that financial mobility allows people to challenge institutions by starting their own businesses, by starting their own companies. And when you're able to start your own business or your own company, you are immediately a competition to a bigger organization. And bigger organizations don't like that. So big organizations want you to be indebted. I'll tell you a little story. When I was at my last company, I had a meeting with the CEO of the company, and we all met on the top floor of the building for lunch. So it was like 30 of us in this building. It was like a big lunch, and the CEO of that company I was talking about how he was really into philanthropy. And so I said, hey, why don't you donate to Khalid Abdullah's student loan fund as a joke? And it got a big laugh out of the room. And then the CEO looked at me right in the face and he said, oh, it looks like you've made a lot of stupid decisions in your life. That's what he said to me. And I was taken aback by it. I couldn't believe that he would say something like that to me. I mean, he might have said bad decisions or stupid decisions. I don't remember, but it cut me. Both of those would have cut me the same way. Because now you're implying that I made bad decisions by educating myself. This is a person who makes 100 times my salary saying that to my face. That means it would take me 100 years to make 1 year's worth of their salary, and they're saying that to me. And everybody laughed because it's the CEO. They have to laugh. And he cut me to my core. And then this is the part that really matters. Forget my part of it. This is the part that really matters. This is what he said. He said, we have found that people who are in debt, who are in student loan debt, make good workers. So what do you make out of that? Moving along. So CBS News goes on to say, like, what if restarted monthly payments are too high for borrowers? I don't even want to read it. I think you guys get it. It's just going to be horrible. It's just going to be horrible. It's just going to continue to spiral out of control. And finally, I have my appendix here. So I'm just going to leave this up for a little bit. Let me I'll get my face out of here for a second. So you can see all of the different sources that I was using. So yeah, I went from 17 different sources for this one. And then I want to show you this is the chart data that I have for the 4-year institutions for the 3 charts that I had earlier. So this is for all institutions. This is for public institutions, and this is for private, nonprofit, and for-profit institutions. And yeah, that's the sort of end of my presentation here. And I just think it's a real shame what we're seeing in this country right now. There's a lot of discussion to be had around this that's not happening. That I think that I hope I've made some points of things that we can at least consider. I'm not saying those are the right things to do, but those are things that we definitely need to start considering as a society. Is if we want an educated and healthy population, then that means that those people need to be educated at a low price, at a reasonable, affordable price, and that those people also need to be able to have the means to make their ends meet so that they can consider education as a viable alternative to trying to find a job or hustle in the job market or something like that. So anyway, thank you so much for joining in. Please like this video. Don't forget to subscribe and share this video with your friends, etc. I'm gonna be doing more content this year, and I really appreciate you guys tuning in. Thank you. Have a great day. Bye.